What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com. Here are my DFS picks for NBA Tuesday, February 28th. These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you don't miss our new videos. In this video, I'm going to go over my top picks for today's NBA slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, we have a 10-game NBA slate tonight. So let's take a look at the point guard position. So you got some good studs on the slate in good matchups. Luka Doncic, Damian Lillard, Ja Morant, Kyrie Irving. But those guys are 10K or more here. So I'm going to give you some value plays or some lower salary options that I think have pretty good upside here. So the first guy is DeJounte Murray from the Atlanta Hawks playing the Washington Wizards, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing point guards. DeJounte Murray has averaged 40.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 36 minutes per game with a 25% usage rate. He's projected at 42 fantasy points here tonight, and that's 5.3 times value. Only 7,900 DraftKings salary. He's 600 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 234 points scored in this game. And DeJounte Murray has scored 41, 50, and 16 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 32, 34, and 33 minutes. So the last 2 games, he's seen a bump to his usage rate, 29%, both of those games, over his season average of 25%. And he has exploded the last 2 games. He's been playing consistent, solid, heavy minutes. It's a decent matchup here tonight. Let's see how he's done versus the Wizards. Oh my goodness. He scored 69, 48, 61, 45, and 29 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Wizards. That's as good as it gets for player versus team history. So I like DeJounte Murray here versus the Washington Wizards. Okay, another point guard that I like, I still think he's underpriced. He's got a great matchup and a reasonably high scoring game here tonight. So I like Russell Westbrook from the LA Clippers playing the Minnesota Timberwolves, who have the 10th worst defense overall. They give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing point guards. Russell Westbrook has averaged 37.5 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 29 minutes per game with a 30% usage rate. He's projected at 36.2 fantasy points here tonight, under his season average, and that's 5.1 times value. He's 7,100 DraftKings salary, 500 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 233.5 points scored in this game. And Russell Westbrook has scored 39 and 45 fantasy points in the last 2 games, playing 25 and 39 minutes. So he certainly looks underpriced to me on DraftKings, actually on both sites. Now, not the best player versus team history versus the Timberwolves. Maybe this is why his price remains low. So he scored 35, 15, 31, and 31 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Timberwolves. But I would throw that player versus team history out. He's got a fantastic matchup, and he can hit 5 times value or more pretty easily. He's got 40 and 50 plus fantasy point upside, so a super high ceiling. So I like Russell Westbrook here versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. Okay, now here's a value play that's opened up because of the injury to Jordan Clarkson, who's been ruled out for Tuesday night. So I like Chris Dunn from the Utah Jazz playing the San Antonio Spurs, who have the absolute worst defense overall. They give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing point guards. Chris Dunn has averaged 29 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 20 minutes per game with a 26% usage rate. Now, he normally doesn't play much, but because of the injury to Jordan Clarkson, he came in and scored 40 fantasy points in 23 minutes. He's going to get a similar opportunity here tonight, and he's sitting at only $3,600 DraftKings salary and 900 more on FanDuel. So Vegas thinks there's going to be 236 points scored in this game. Now, his projection is way off because just normally he's not out there playing a lot of minutes. So Chris Dunn, let's put him at a 20 fantasy point production. That's under 1 point a minute. I mean, he's at 1.75 points per fantasy points per minute, but that's on such a small sample size, you can't really count it. So if he gets 20 fantasy points at $3,600 DraftKings salary, let's just take a look and see what that would be 5.6 times value. So obviously if he went out and scored 30 or 40 fantasy points, his value would be through the roof like it was yesterday. It's just a great matchup, so I think it's worth rolling the dice on this high risk, high reward play here. So I like Chris Dunn here versus the San Antonio Spurs.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching.
If you want to enter the drawing for $25 PayPal,
all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won.
And then we'll send you $25 PayPal.
So it's that easy, and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video. So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
Okay, let's take a look at the shooting guard position. So I like Tim Hardaway Jr. from the Dallas Mavericks playing the Indiana Pacers, who have the 5th worst defense overall, give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing shooting guards, also eligible at the small forward position. So Tim Hardaway Jr. has averaged 23.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 30 minutes per game with a 21% usage rate. He's projected at 24.5 fantasy points here tonight. He needs about 25 fantasy points to get to 5 times value. He's $5,100 DraftKings salary, 300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 237 points scored in this game. So it's a high scoring game, a fantastic matchup, and he scored 29 and 26 fantasy points in the last 2 games, playing 24 and 26 minutes. So I like this pick just because of his player versus team history. I think his salary, the matchup, the high scoring game. So he scored 29, 24, 29, and 45 fantasy points in his last 4 games versus the Pacers. Now, Tim Hardaway Jr., he can make or break your lineup, is a hit or miss player for the most part. He's got a pretty big upside, so I think he's worth rolling the dice on here if you need this mid-range play. He certainly has that 30-plus fantasy point upside, and he's got a pretty big ceiling if he gets hot during the game. So I like Tim Hardaway Jr. as a tournament play here versus the Indiana Pacers. Okay, now here's a value play. I'll give him to you at small forward. Let's see if we got any other shooting guards here. Yeah, so here's a shooting guard. This goes off, this is because of the Jordan Clarkson injury. So this is another player from the Jazz that's going to get some minutes or get extended minutes. So take a look at Ochai Agbaji. I'm crushing this name. I'm so sorry. So Ochai from the Utah Jazz playing the San Antonio Spurs, who have the worst defense overall, give up the 9th most fantasy points to opposing shooting guards. He's also eligible at the small forward position. So Ochai has scored 22, 24, and 23 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 31, 21, and 38 minutes. So he may be the more consistent guy to go to get more consistent fantasy points, where Chris Dunn just has that 40 fantasy point game and that, just came in yesterday, where Ochai looks like he's been playing a lot more than Chris Dunn. So it might actually be worth trusting Ochai over Chris Dunn. The the choice will be yours. But Ochai is projected at 20 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.3 times value. He's 3,800 DraftKings salary, 100 more on FanDuel. So I like Ochai Agbaji here versus the San Antonio Spurs. Okay, let's take a look at the small forward position. So I continue to like Lou Dort from the Oklahoma City Thunder playing the Sacramento Kings, who have the 11th worst defense overall, give up the second most fantasy points to opposing small forwards. Lou Dort has averaged 25.9 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 30 minutes per game with a 20% usage rate. He's projected at 25.8 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.2 times value. That all certainly seems reasonable and possible and expected almost here in a great matchup in a high-scoring game. So he's only 5,000 DraftKings salary, 700 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 238.5 points scored in this game. So I think this is a good way to get a low salary piece of this game. Some pretty big upside here. So Lou Dort has scored 27, 37, and 36 fantasy points in his last 3 games, playing 31, 36, and 36 minutes. Usage rate trending up, and his production and minutes have been fantastic. And it's a good matchup. It's not a back-to-back in a high-scoring game. A lot to like with this pick. So I like Lou Dort, who has scored 27, 25, and 32 fantasy points in his last 3 games versus the Kings, here versus the Sacramento Kings. Okay, now I've got a couple of value plays here at the small forward position. So the first one, he's been playing pretty well recently. He's definitely burned me in some lineups in the past. He's one of those guys that can go out and just have a really bad game and score like 12 fantasy points and burn your lineup. But he has been playing well recently, and he's playing a ton of minutes. So I like Harrison Barnes from the Sacramento Kings playing the Oklahoma City Thunder, who have the 7th worst defense overall, middle of the pack defending opposing small forwards. Harrison Barnes has averaged 25 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 33 minutes per game with a 17% usage rate. He's projected at 24.8 fantasy points here tonight, so right around his season average, and that's 5.4 times value. Only 4,600 DraftKings salary, 300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 238.5 points scored in this game, so a high-scoring game, a good game to stack. So Harrison Barnes has scored 28, 26, and 24 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 32, 40, and 23 minutes. All 3 of those games would have been over 5 times value at this price tag. And Harrison Barnes has scored 28, 16, 36, 50, and 27 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Thunder. So excellent player versus team history. With a low price tag, a pretty decent matchup. He's playing well recently, playing a lot of minutes in a high-scoring game. I think this play makes a lot of sense. So I like Harrison Barnes here versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. Okay, now another value play, same price tag on DraftKings, but much more expensive on FanDuel. So for DraftKings, I like Bogdan Bogdanovic from the Atlanta Hawks playing the Washington Wizards, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing small forwards. Bogdan Bogdanovic has averaged 26.5 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 30 minutes per game with a 20% usage rate. He's projected at 25.4 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.5 times value. He's 4,600 DraftKings salary. Now he is 1,400 more on FanDuel, so be a DraftKings play for me. So Vegas thinks there's going to be 234 points scored in this game, and Bogdan Bogdanovic has scored 40, 17, and 21 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 28, 22, and 23 minutes. So it looks like his minutes have been inconsistent the last 3 games. So that's why a little risk with this play. If he can get close to 30 minutes or more, he should do really well, averaging 0.91 fantasy points per minute at only 4,600 DraftKings salary. So it's all about how many minutes is he going to play this game. And he's got a good track record here versus the Wizards. Scored 30, 33, 35, 30, and 37 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Wizards. So you would think they'd give him the opportunity out there here tonight. So I like Bogdan Bogdanovic here versus the Washington Wizards.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, let's take a look at the power forward position. Already gave you Harrison Barnes, and that's all I had marked. So let's just see if I can find another one real quick using the tools here. You got a guy like Jeremy Sochan, who is playing, looks like 32 minutes a game the last 2 games, scored 33 and 20 fantasy points. He's at 5K. I don't know how reliable that play would be, though. Would want to see a little bit more from him first. You're looking at a guy like DeMar DeRozan. He doesn't have a great matchup, but at 7,700 DraftKings salary, he's averaging 40.9 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 36 minutes per game with a 29% usage rate. So he's projected at 40.7 fantasy points here tonight, and that's 5.3 times value. He's 7,700 DraftKings salary, 500 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 220.5 points scored in this game. DeMar DeRozan has scored 44 and 32 fantasy points in the last 2 games, playing 35 and 27 minutes. And he scored 28, 31, 47, 42, and 48 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Raptors. So I think his price tag makes sense. We know he has that 40 plus fantasy point upside. I think he could return over 5 times value here tonight. The other guy at a similar price tag would be Kyle Kuzma, who does have a good matchup here tonight. So you could go with him. But let's move on to the center position. So I like Christian Wood. Now, he's not playing a ton of minutes, but his production has been fantastic. He's got a good matchup here. His price tag's right around where I think he should be priced, but let's just get into him. So Christian Wood from the Dallas Mavericks playing the Indiana Pacers, who have the 5th worst defense overall, give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing centers. Christian Wood has averaged 33.7 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 27 minutes per game with a 26% usage rate, projected at 34.4 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.3 times value. So he's 6,500 DraftKings salary, 300 more on FanDuel, or actually 300 less on FanDuel. So I like that FanDuel price. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 236 points scored in this game. Christian Wood has scored 31, 29, and 28 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 20, 22, and 21 minutes. So he's averaging 1.25 fantasy points per minute. The only problem here is the last 3 games, minutes have been pretty low compared to a season average of 27. So let's just take a look at Christian Wood, his scoring log, and let's just take a look. It looks like his minutes have dropped off significantly. I think he's only going to play 20 to 22 minutes, and if that case at 6,500, you know what, guys? Sorry about that. Christian Wood, a little bit too risky for me. Yeah, he certainly can get to 30 plus. I think on FanDuel, he might be a good play because he's 300 less with a good matchup. But let's throw that out. The guy that I would play over Christian Wood, especially on DraftKings, but not on FanDuel, is Jacob Piotr from the Toronto Raptors playing the Chicago Bulls, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. Now, they have been pretty good versus opposing centers, but Jacob Piotr averaging 31.8 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 26 minutes per game with a 19% usage rate, projected at 31 fantasy points here tonight. That's 5.1 times value. He's 6,100 DraftKings salary. It says he's 2,300 more on FanDuel. I have to check that. That is super expensive on FanDuel, so price doesn't make a ton of sense. So on FanDuel, Christian Wood would be the guy. There's another play here that I like as well on FanDuel. But Jacob Piotr has scored 35, 39, and 56 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 27, 26, and 30 minutes. And take a look at this player versus team history. Scored 34, 48, 29, 44, and 39 fantasy points in his last 5 games versus the Bulls. So absolutely, he's one of my favorite plays on DraftKings. So I like Jacob Piotr here versus the Chicago Bulls. And just a quick mention to Kevon Looney from the Golden State Warriors playing the Portland Trailblazers, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, but they give up the second most fantasy points to opposing centers. Kevon Looney averaging 24.3 fantasy points per game on the season, playing an average of 23 minutes per game with a 10% usage rate, projected at 23.8 fantasy points here tonight. He needs exactly 25 fantasy points to hit 5 times value. 5,000 DraftKings salary, 700 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 236.5 points scored in this game. And Kevon Looney has scored 40, 26, and 33 fantasy points in the last 3 games, playing 31, 25, and 19 minutes. So minutes and production trending up. I think it might be time to respect Kevon Looney. And if he continues to play 25 to 30 minutes, this guy's averaging 1.06 fantasy points per minute. He's going to be in 6K plus range soon, so take advantage of this 5K price tag while you can. So I like Kevon Looney here versus the Portland Trailblazers.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again and good luck.